Okay, so the idea of this session this morning is really just to try and raise some questions over where we were, where we've come via COVID, what's changed, and to try and leave everyone with some thought-provoking ideas to where the consistency is in their security controls and whether they need to have a rethink as the world has changed. And anytime, any place, anywhere. For those of you that are old enough, I did realize when I had this conversation with our marketing department and called it Martini, that there was some really blank looking younger faces. And we will just have a brief look at what I'm referring to, because a lot of people just it just shows how old some of us really are. Consistency control. So the agenda, we're just gonna flick through, what things look like, what's changed with COVID, the W questions, and what does good really look like. And perhaps more about what it should look like in the future. And then that also raises the questions in terms of what should you be thinking about now with a view to where you want to go to in the future. And for those of you that are old enough, you will remember
is the Martini time of
this. We don't need to watch all of it, but
it's the Martini time of
it's effectively a brand. That's probably enough of that, but Martini had this whole brand image which was built around any time, any place, anywhere, and in my head, I've sort of started to see that this is a mentality that we're going to need going forward because of COVID. So I started looking at what's changed with COVID, and everything's gone to the cloud. Everything's now Office 365 or similar. Everything suddenly became the emergency VPN, everything across the internet. And the deferred in my head were referred to all of those projects that stopped and everything that was planned because of COVID, and we started to behave very, very differently. And 19% was the comical number in my head of the percentage of people that I thought were probably as secure post-COVID working habits as opposed to before. We saw some quite bizarre things go on as people rushed to that working from home environment. We saw some companies issue admin credentials so that people could do things remotely. We saw all sorts of different VPNs, vendors that in many ways probably should have been absorbed into bigger companies or even disappeared, suddenly having record quarters because any VPN seemed to be the only route forward. And that raises some questions, certainly I think, about going forward and what's happening. If you think about what the world looked like pre-COVID, we had data centers and offices connected to data centers, and then data centers connected to the internet and the cloud apps. And then we felt that was a very secure environment, and companies felt that was certainly the right way to do things. But realistically, we then saw consistency of what people do fall apart, and that was a result of the fact that everybody just went home and everybody just connected the home Wi-Fi via a VPN straight back to the data center. So people would say, well, that's just like working from the office, and in many ways it is, other than Ed and me were just chatting about the size of their corporate network. Now it involves everyone's home, and the fact that you've connected devices that have got connections with the kids' Xboxes and various other different IoT events that are going on in the home environment that no one's got any control over. And as we start to move forward, I think what we've got to do is we've got to look at this picture and we've got to say, is this right? I mean, in many ways, we think this has changed, but I'd argue that nothing has changed. We've continued to operate in exactly the same way, just by making the home part of that VPN. And you've got to question why we would do that in terms of going forward and what we want the new world to look like, because I think we all accept that we absolutely are going to need to build this Martini style network anytime, any place, anywhere. And we're going to have to, we need that thought, I think, in everything that we do. And if we look at how we build the consistencies and the importance of it, is because so often in the past we've considered that we're behind this firewall and we're in this secure corporate infrastructure, and because of that, we trust it, and we trust it. So perhaps we don't build it with the necessary levels of policy and control. And what we probably now need to do is think about how we behave as if any application, any device could be in Costa Coffee, it could be on the train, and it could be anywhere in the world. And we would suggest that people need to start to think about this consistency, and they need to ask themselves all of the questions around who's doing things, why, where, when, and to build themselves up this complete view of how things should look going forward, and that how this becomes the standard. And when you're building these types of environments, you've got to have considered all the things, because it's the standard that cannot be changed. You can't adjust it because someone wants to work in a different way. So that's why all the things have got to be considered. Before this started, Ed and I were just talking about that whole connected car and how you build the standard for what that's going to look like in terms of security, in terms of data sharing, in terms of what information is available to the car manufacturer, and what are the privacy requirements, and what's fair use for the manufacturer themselves in terms of the data they're going to be getting. And I think that it would appear quite a simple conversation on a car, because it's a device, and because of that, it's not a human who might want to do things differently. But if you start to consider the entertainment systems that are in cars, and the data that's getting pushed to the user or being pulled by the user to their infotainment sort of systems, then again there's going to have to be some real degree of understanding as to what the policies look like. So we've put no trust or zero trust here. It's a massive subject, and really it's all driven by how do we do things in a way that allow the complete anytime, any place, anywhere approach to everything we do. And if we can build that in the right way, and we know that we're asking all the right questions of our systems, then ultimately we will have built something that's highly consistent, and something that will set off alarm bells when those consistencies aren't met, but also will be built around the fact that if there is no trust, then a lot of the other infrastructure questions go away. Because if there's no trust and no privilege, and the policy is driven to drive mainly authentication for everything, the device, the user, the application, whatever it is that's necessary, then it does ask questions going forward about, you're not going to need a VPN. You're never going, why would you connect to the office to go then out, or to the enterprise data center to then go out of the enterprise data center, when you can build all of these things into your security controls, which is going to give you the consistency. So everything can essentially become a dirty network. Sitting in the office should be the same as sitting in Costa Coffee, because there potentially is no firewall going forward. And everything can be public facing, because it doesn't matter who can access it, because it's all controlled by, this complete policy of being able to control whose authentication is happening, where, when, et cetera, et cetera. So suddenly, the world looks very different. And, the interesting concept to me then is that, the firewall is dead, which raises, again, some other very interesting thoughts in your head. And then, I've conjured this idea of the firewall is dead, long live the firewall, because we've had VPNs for 20 years, we've had firewalls for longer. And if you think how long it will be, what's the long tail to people realizing that they no longer need a firewall? And perhaps that's, another 15 years. But if you think about what we probably should be building to get that consistency, is we should be building this cloud connected environment whereby everything can talk to everything. And it's all about the security controls that will enable the determination of who can actually get to connect to these things and run the applications that they need, and what are the multiple layers of defense in that policy that would allow you to do it. So we sort of become the more completely collapsed infrastructure, because everything that we need is already out there and done. If you look at any technology companies that start up in the world now, it's quite interesting to understand what they look like as an infrastructure. And they sort of have that, even as security technology companies, they sort of have that BYOD concept of, every employee goes and buys their own device, and they lay down some form of, posture onto that device to be able to control it. And then from that perspective, they basically give people authentication into G Suite or 365, and then all of their applications sit very remotely. So, bizarrely, you can see technology startup companies that have no infrastructure at all other than the devices. Even their development environments are secure but hosted somewhere, so that the concept of having stuff and boxes and racks and their own infrastructure, it just doesn't exist anymore. And it's a big change from the world where we've all come from. So all I really wanted to do was try and get people to think finally about what this really means, and eat, sleep, repeat. Eat, sleep, authenticate, repeat. And I think as we move forward, you're going to see a world whereby we build a virtual public network and not a virtual private network. And everything is going to be about the ability to have multiple layers of authentication. And that will determine what security actually looks like. And if you then think about some of the things and the projects that got put on hold because of COVID, and what they were and what they were going to be, and what the plan was for these projects going forward, then I think we should all sit back and look at some of those. And rather than, as the world starts to sort of get back to normal, I don't think that we should be bringing back those projects and having a real in-depth look at what they look like, and whether they are actually following the future of having this, public-facing ability, but with security controls that have got such consistency that they reflect what you want them to look like in the next 10 years, as opposed to perhaps what we thought they should look like a couple of years ago.